everyone, and welcome to Elsevier's Spotlight podcast series. In the coming sessions, I'll be meeting with the movers and shakers from across Elsevier and the wider publishing industry to talk about their experiences in 2020 in tackling the challenges of COVID-19, their outlook for the year ahead, and particularly for the final months of the year as we approach what would be the Frankfurt Book Fair season. I also wanted to touch upon some of the hot topics and interesting news that's coming through from Elsevier. Today, I'm meeting with Chris Saynor, the standards editor at Editor. Hi, Chris. Welcome.
Hi, Fiona. Thank you.
Where are you joining us from today, actually?
I'm in the editor office in London.
Okay. And is that where you've been based throughout the whole of the year? You know, how has COVID-19 really impacted the way in which you work?
Well, we're a small team here in London. There are 3 of us. So during the lockdown, we were all working from home, and then we've gradually come back. We're in a good situation. Our building isn't particularly big, so we can come back safely to our office. So we're doing a rota of part of the time in the office, part of the time at home. Okay,
that's good to hear. Getting a degree of normality, I think, is really important at this stage.
It is, yes.
Before we get down to the business, and what I wanted to do is talk to you all about metadata today, I thought perhaps you could give us a bit of an introduction about what Editor is as an organisation and the work that you do.
So, Editor is an international organisation. We're a not-for-profit membership financed organisation based here in London. We create, manage, promote standards for the communication of information in the global book and serial supply chains. We also provide management services to some of the other international bodies in the identifiers world, notably the ISNI, International ISNI Agency, the DOI Foundation, things like that.
Okay, that's great. One of the things that I'm particularly keen on as a marketeer is the Onix feed about our print books at Elsevier. I think that it's perhaps it suffers from a bit of bad press because it's quite challenging, and it all happens in the background and people don't tend to pay a lot of attention to it except in those moments when it's not doing what it should do. Can you perhaps give us a brief overview as to what is Onix and how it's used?
Onix is a message format. Onix is it's a standardized format for communicating information in the global book supply chain. It's designed for a computer to talk to another computer. Mm-hmm. Onix itself should only worry people when they're on the technical side of things and there's something going on with the message. What should be concerning for publishers and booksellers is the quality of the data that is then transmitted or received in that message. It has the advantage of being a global standard. So when used correctly, it's a rich source of all the information that anyone could need for the book supply chain.
Okay, so our book selling customers will be most interested in this, particularly in the current climate, because it's essential for doing any sort of digital business. A lot of them will be using it to feed their websites.
Yep.
Perhaps if they've got a web store or something.
I would imagine there are 2 major scenarios for your book selling customers. They'll be maybe doing one or both of feeding their websites, using the Onix feed to populate the information on the website, or their internal catalogs, the database they may use to manage their stock. That may not actually have a customer facing element to it, but is also vital.
Okay. The key reason why I wanted you on the call today is that Elsevier is going to be rolling out the Thema classification in its Onix feed in the coming few weeks for our health science titles. I think our research reference titles have had it for several months at least. But we're getting on board with our medical titles now, and I thought, well, let's have a chat about what is Thema. What is the classification? How does this sit relative to BIC and BISAC? Can you give us a bit of an introduction to what Thema is?
Yeah. So if we go back a bit, prior to its existence, the book trade created national schemes to identify classification for books. So in the United Kingdom, BIC, the USA created BISAC, France has the CLIDL codes, Germany, WGS, the Netherlands created NUR, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you're getting a multiplication of the systems, which are fine when you're just talking about a domestic market and the data flow rests within that domestic market. But as soon as you cross borders and you're saying, right, do I have to add this code for Germany, this code for the Netherlands, this code for Belgium, this code for France, these codes for Spain, these codes for the, so there's a multiplication of work. So back in, I think it's 2011 at the Frankfurt Book Fair, group of the European booksellers thought there must be a better way of doing this. Why don't we create something that's international so that publishers, booksellers only have to deal with maybe just two schemes, their national scheme plus one that will be sort of like an international language that we can use for international trade. And so the concept of, it was initially called IBIC, and then it changed its name to Thema, was born to try and solve a problem about too many different bits of information in a complex global market. So the idea was to create a simplification. And in fact, what we have seen is in some markets, the Thema subject codes have now replaced national schemes. So the UK is phasing out BIC, Germany's phasing out WGS, the Netherlands is phasing out NUR. In Scandinavian countries, it's become the primary scheme. The Japanese market, it's going to become the national scheme to replace several existing schemes, etc., etc.
It's great to hear about the adoption of it on all these different markets. So clearly there's a bit of a language issue here. How does Thema transfer into all the multiple languages? Is it actually built on multiple languages then, or is English the primary language?
From its very start, Thema had an international bias. So it's a set of codes. They're alphanumeric codes, and that's what Thema is. And those alphanumeric codes go in your metadata. And what we've done, what exists, and what you see as a human is there's a heading that gives its meaning, and then there are notes that give further explanations on what this is, how to use it, this particular code. And the primary language is English. We create the master version in English, but it's not designed to be an English language, purely English language tool. And then there are translations done by, we have Thema user groups in different countries. Those bodies have organized translations. I think we now have 22 different translated versions. So the code is a constant. Then the headers are translated to maintain the meaning, but so they become user-friendly in those different languages. So that means that anybody, so we just received the updated German translation. We're about to receive the updated Japanese translation. There's a translation into Arabic, for example. Means that a publisher in any of those countries can look up in their own language, search the right code. That code will then go in their metadata. And anybody receiving those codes can check what the equivalence is in their own language. It also means that a bookseller, if they wanted to, could use those headings in their own language for their own websites. It's a choice. You don't have to use the wording that we use, but you could use those headings as well on your site.
It's great to hear how you've thought about all of those different language implications, and there's obviously a lot of partners globally who are supporting this to ensure that it actually can be rolled out into these other local markets really effectively.
Thema is very good because it's a very consensual, all our standards are based on consent. We don't change or add anything to our standards without input from we have an international steering committee for each of our standards. But prior to any changes going to that committee, we get input from our members. We get input from people who are using the standards, and input from professional bodies who will then say, well, we've noticed in our market that there's this new, there's a lot of books coming out about this subject. We only have a very broad code. Perhaps we need a more detailed code, or how can we do it? Or there's a misunderstanding. We're doing the Japanese translation. There's a misunderstanding of what this term might mean in English. So we might go back and revise the term, add a longer note. For any of the people listening to this who actually look at the Thema interface and look at the browser, sometimes you may see very long notes in English, but this is because it's designed for a global audience and it's not translated into every language. And there may be people using this who have a good grasp of English, but it may not be their first language. So we try and explain it in words that that we try and make it as inclusive as possible by creating a language that we hope can be understood. So we try and avoid too many British English terms or American English terms that might mean something only to a market. And that comes from the users themselves, who will ask us questions and say, well, what does that term actually mean, or that phrase? So it's very good that way.
That's great. So in lots of ways, it mirrors what's been done with BIC and BISAC in the past, is that there is a real update concept built into the whole program as well. Yep.
But it's, so we have a 2-year update program on the main system, the main codes. We also have something that's unique to Thema, because it's global and it's international. We have what we call national qualifiers. Thema is made up of subject codes and qualifiers. So qualifiers are things like, you can say what age group it's for, or particular interest group, or educational level. And there are national groups who say, well, we need some new qualifiers, but just for our educational system, or we need a few place qualifiers just for us. So we will add national qualifiers on a 6-monthly basis if they are required. Otherwise, we try and get a balance right between the needs of the industry to update and add new concepts or make changes, and the fact that when you have any sort of standard, you have to implement it. You have to allow time for people to update, to add the codes, to look at things. So the 2-year cycle we see as a good balance.
So I'm imagining that many of the people that might watch this podcast will have a particularly commercial outlook on things, and they'll want to know, well, how does this actually impact the work that I do? Am I going to make more sales using this code? Should I actually be insisting that our technical people introduce this? What sort of benefits might there be for a bookseller who's concerned about sales versus the amount of effort it might be to adopt this?
Several things. First of all, it's what's becoming the global scheme. So we're seeing adoption in more and more countries. So if you're a bookseller, especially if you're selling books from different countries, or your publisher coming from different countries, you're going to get codes that are going to make more sense. It's, for example, the BISAC, which is an excellent system of codes, is designed for the United States. So it has a necessary bias to the way books are sold in the United States of America. Whereas Thema tries to be global. So you get that advantage of the global side of things. There's a really interesting study that was done in 2019 by CB in the Netherlands, working with bol.com. So in the Netherlands, CB decided, with the consent of publishers, to start working on adding Thema into the marketplace. But they wanted to measure what happened when they did this. So they started working with Bol, being the biggest online retailer in the Netherlands. And they started in April 2019, and their initial aim was to add one Thema code to as many titles as possible. And they did that using an automatic sort of mapping and AI, just as an initial experiment. And by October, they said they'd seen a 5% increase in conversion to sale on their website, just by adding one single Thema. Because what they allowed them to do was give far more choice and far more detail to clients coming to the bol.com website, who could then, they were taken to subjects that were interesting for them rather than the broader, what they called shelves that they had before.
I imagine this also will mean that the discoverability of our English language titles in foreign language markets might improve.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, because if you're sending, as Elsevier, you're sending out Thema codes, your titles published in English, you're sending them out to a global market, bookseller receives it, will get a code that they can map to, doesn't matter if they have a good grasp of the English language or the contents of the books, by using a subject scheme like Thema. It makes it much easier for them to put the books in the right sections and have all the similar books in the right sections, which allows their customers who know what they want, the kind of things they're looking for, to come to the right section of their book, of their website, or for their booksellers to be more confident in recommending books when they have clients that come into their actual bookshops.
That's great. I'm sure our retail sales team will look forward to seeing an increase in sales in our non-English language markets.
And the advantage is because, so somebody like your Elsevier, Helsa, will be adding the codes, sending out to your clients. Your clients, a lot of your bookseller clients will have specialist sections, and then there will be feedback. That creates a feedback loop with yourselves. And you might say, we've actually got a lot of health books about this topic, but Thema doesn't really seem to cover that very well. So that feedback loop, you can hear back from your booksellers who are saying, well, we really need to be able to identify this particular topic, but it isn't very easy. So that feedback can come back to editor, you can pass it, make a suggestion to add new codes to the members. So the more you use it in this global market, the more we can also improve Thema.
Excellent. Just to reassure those retail customers who are now really excited about the prospect of increasing the discoverability of the titles in their catalogue, what does this actually mean though? Do they have to do something, or how is it going to appear? How does this classification appear in the data feed?
So if you're getting the, for example, you're taking the Elsevier Onix feed, what you will see, well, if you actually look at the Onix, you will see there's a tag marked subject, a composite marked subject, and with that you'll see an alphanumeric code. That's what you'll get. And that alphanumeric code corresponds to a heading. So you will import that into your database, and you can either use that directly as a display against the actual Thema headings. From the editor website, you can download Thema in multiple languages as an Excel, as a JSON, as an HTML file, or as an XML file. So you can use that if you want to use either the English language headings or one of the other headings, or you can just say, right, I'm going to map them to my own headings, because these headings that I've created on my website make sense to my customers, to my local customers. So I'm going to map that. So if you're already receiving BIC codes, for example, from the UK as a bookseller, then you'll find the process actually quite simple because there's a great deal of similarity between the two structures to map to Thema. So for a bookseller, there will be a little work to do, you know,
if they choose to do that. But you said that a lot of countries, they'll often continue to carry the national classification, and then the Thema code comes alongside it.
Yeah, because Onix can take as many subject codes. There's no limit. Onix doesn't set a limit on what you can send. So you will continue to see BISAC codes in there. You may get library classifications, which will probably be useful as well. Elsevier, you have your own headings and detailed subject codes that you're probably also going to include in your Onix, which will be useful for any customers receiving that, because that's specialized information that's going to give them more information. I would say a scheme like Thema, implementing it allows an automatic, once you've done the initial, right, I'm either going to use Thema as is, so I'm going to do a one-for-one, which I've seen some bookshop sites do, or you can do a one-step, which is I'll take Thema, but I'm going to map it to what I want to cook, what I want to display to my customers. Once you've done that initial work, and made that initial choice, then it's easy. It's an automatic workflow. So the life becomes much simpler. Another interesting thing that you can do once, so Elsevier has its Thema codes, you can start requesting, could you only send me titles that have got these Thema codes, because we have a school that really needs to know all the titles that you publish about this subject. So as soon as those data points become available, it's much easier to do filtered searches to find precise information.
Excellent. So as we wrap up, if anybody's got any further questions or wants more information about Thema, where can they get that information?
Start with the editor website. We have a whole, a really good page dedicated to Thema. We have some very good documentation. There's a paper called Thema for Booksellers, which is designed to be an introduction to Thema for booksellers. There's a basic user guide. You can also find the code lists and the translations there. We also have an interactive browser where you can look up the codes. We also have a mailing list which you can join and ask questions, which we encourage people to send in questions on that. We have a similar one for Onix. The idea is that we make announcements on this list, but we also want people to ask us questions. You can contact us directly at editor as well. We're happy to try and answer questions. I mean, we're small, so we may not get back to them straight away, but those questions are really valuable to us as well, as they help us understand how people are using Thema and some of the issues that they may come across. So.
Great, I'll be sure to put the link to the editor website then in the description of the podcast so people can get to it then. Yep. So the physical Frankfurt Book Fair is sadly not taking place this year, and I'm guessing you've got in place other activities where you'll be connecting with the publishing industry over the next few weeks. Mm-hmm. Do you want to give us a brief overview of what you might be doing?
So Editor always runs a conference, supply chain conference on the Tuesday afternoon in Frankfurt. Obviously, we can't do that physically this year, so we will be doing that online. It will be free. Great. So the details of that will be on our website as well. There we usually have people talking about different aspects of the supply chain, global supply chain, using standards, etc. We have the meetings normally in Frankfurt. We also have the meetings of our international steering committee. So those will all be virtual now. That's what we will be doing. We've shifted to doing a lot of training, as we used to do a lot of in-person training, but because of circumstances, we've shifted to doing a lot of more online training as well, which has been interesting, a move for us.
Great. Well, it's great to hear how you're adapting and pivoting to embrace the digital world. It's very appropriate for an organization like Editor, given the work you do. On a lighter note, what are you going to miss most then about the Frankfurt Book Fair, since you're not going to get to visit the city?
Do you know, I think walking around the halls and seeing all the different publishers, organizations from all over the globe, I think it's one of the best things about Frankfurt, is just seeing how diverse our industry is and all the different people and publishers and titles that are there. And I think it's one of the best things about Frankfurt, is that diversity, the sheer global inclusive nature of our industry.
Yes, there's definitely a distinct energy around the Frankfurt Book Fair that you can't replicate, I think, virtually, but hopefully next year we will see each other all again.
Absolutely.
Until then, I think we should just wrap up, but thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction to Onix, Thema, Editor, and the work that you're all doing. Stay safe, and thanks to anybody that's listening.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye.